Hey guys, check out this 4150 4-hole carb spacer. It's actually a carb vibration dampener by KEC. You can see there, KEC carb dampener, and this was one of their designs, you know, patent pending designs. I'm not sure if these guys were one of the first, you know, to have come up with that dampener spacer stuff that was, you know, out and about years ago. Yeah. So Comp Cams also had one like this, you know, and both of them have versions to suit 4150 and also Dominator 4500 flange bases. But yeah, it's basically a rubber insulator sandwich between these two plates, and obviously this bottom plate is the one that goes on your intake, and this version is 1 inch tall, and then you've got your top plate which basically gets mounted and floats on the rubber mounting. So, you know, it's just to prevent you know, any type of vibration that can harm the fuel in your carb. And it also you know, acts as a what do you call it, heat spacer as well, you know, to prevent any engine heat coming up and reaching your carb and your fuel. And that's just all it is. And you know, there was years of R&D testing before they released this apparently, and it's just, you know, it's just to prevent any you know, aerated fuel, you know, going through the system, and just to prevent, you know, bad atomization and stuff like that, without the carb being cushioned properly on the intake, you know, or on the spacer itself. That's all it's for. So when you think about it, it's basically a 3-in-1 deal. And what I mean by that is, to begin with, it's an actual spacer, 1 inch, so it'll give you, you know, your normal plenum, a bit of plenum volume there as a spacer wheel, and it acts as a dampener, you know, just to dampen out those you know, harmonics, especially at full noise, you know, when the engine's, you know, on red line. It'll just prevent, you know, fuel dropout and stuff like that, which is fair enough. And also it's got a great heat transfer with that rubber, you know, in between that, taking up all that heat away from the carb itself. So pretty cool deal. Yeah, it's a pretty well-made piece as well. You can see there the top plates like CNC machined, and basically that rubber is somehow sandwiched in between that, and it's fairly solid. And you know, these guys have done some in-house testing apparently, and they've seen gains of up to 35 horsepower on their tests. And like I said, that, you know, if that's the case, it'll be the result of all three things working away there. So being the spacer itself, you know, plenum volume on whatever deal they were testing on, you know, the heat, insulation, and also the dampening effect. Which makes sense, you know, if you think about it. It's cushioned by a rubber there, and if you look at that Edelbrock 2-inch spacer that I got here out of that phenolic, that plasticky stuff, you know, it's real solid and stuff. So imagine that mounted on your intake and your carb, and everything's just solid mounted, and that, you know, those fuel bowls will be vibrating away, you know what I mean, maybe possibly causing fuel disruption, you know, going through the metering blocks and things like that. And that's why they come up with this. But in saying all that, I want to put it to the test. So I want to run my own little in-house experiment and test, where I'll run a quality, I have got a quality vibrating disc sander, that I'll turn upside down, and I'll make a pad on it where this can bolt on, and I'll make another pad on it mimicking the carb base plate, and I'll strap down some fuel in a bowl, and we'll just see what happens when we vibrate the hell out of that. We'll just take a good look, and I'll like to test that idea on both, on this solid one, see how the fuel acts in that bowl when it's on vibration mode, and then we'll put that on there and see what the fuel does with the actual dampener, and we'll physically watch and have a look at what it does. So I'll be using this sander of mine that I've had for close to 30 years now. It's funny also, I want to mention, while we're on the dampening topic, I found these rubber strips weeks back, and grabbed them from work, and they acted as cushioning barriers between heavy pallets on a container from overseas, and they were going to get thrown out, so I just grabbed them, took them home, and you know, they're like maybe, I don't know, 2 mils thick, and I just thought, how cool, you know, they could be used. I could, you know, they're wide enough, I could cut them up as, you know, gaskets, you know, carburetor and spacer gaskets, right? You know, to use with the stuff that I'm doing, just for that reason, to act as a bit of a heat insulator and a cushioning barrier. And it's just weird, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know if you Google or something's listening in on me or reading my thoughts, and then this thing popped up, and I grabbed this for, you know, 30 bucks delivered, which is like 20 bucks US. And yeah, and I've already tested this. I actually sat a piece of this in fuel for a few days and took it out just to see if it all break apart, and it doesn't. It's just tough as, and it's chemical resistant, you know. And you know, you use that, you can, you know, cut it up as gasket material, and you just smear a bit of you know, silicone, obviously, and you lay that down and just bolt down your spacer and carb. I don't think that'll give you any issues, and it's fairly solid, you know. Anyway, I just thought I'll share that with you, a little bit off topic, but yeah, you'll see that if I lay it there, and it's just enough to make my own cushioned carb gaskets. So basically this piece of timber here will resemble the motor itself, if not the intake, and that'll be mounted on top of that vibrating sander. Okay, so basically just grab the scrap piece of flat timber, and I just notched out those little locking tabs that I'm going to use and wrap and twist some strong wire around that Roops sander when it's all upside down and that. And I'll test both out, and that just fits in there. You can see there, that's all it has to do, just sit on the surface. The wire will be clamping down that timber onto the sander. I'll put some temporary screws or whatnot to hold that down, another flat plate here or some timber, and then my bowl of fuel, and we'll just see what that all does. And we'll test this solid spacer, and we'll test the dampener as well. And we'll just see what it does to the fuel. Okay, so got the holes drilled out right there for the spacer. Now I'm not too sure if I should mimic a gasket for there, because this rubber does protrude a little bit out from the surface. So I'm thinking that that rubber is what seals on the intake, and they just run a smear of silicone on the outer side. So I'll leave that bit out, but when it comes for the top, it's pretty well thought of also. So once you pop that onto your intake, you can put your manifold bolt, that'll bolt that straight down. So that goes through the top plate, as you can see there. So directly from the top you can bolt down your spacer onto your intake, and then it comes with these threaded bosses that'll go into this top dampener plate, and that'll just screw like that, and then you just run your carb studs onto that. It's pretty cool. There you go. So everything's been thought of, you know, no tricks, no confusion. Pretty sweet. Okay, so holes are drilled out. We'll just pop that on there. Okay, so that timber's ready to rock. I've got the holes drilled out for this to mount, and I went ahead and put some slots, a bit of a trench in there just for the wire tie down onto that sander. It doesn't interfere with the surface of the spacer when it's clamped, and not only that, the last thing I want is for it to scratch up my pretty spacers here. Alright guys, so that's mounted to the timber, and I almost made a mistake. I was going to clamp the whole lot down onto that, and you don't do that. That's why these are two separate plates. So the bottom plate gets sandwiched down onto your intake manifold, which is this timber, let's say for instance, and the top plate remains floating, and it's part of the dampener, if you get what I mean. So I almost made a mistake there, but not to worry, picked up on it. And I'll just cut that trench in there because I'm going to wrap this wire around that vibrating sander. And like I said, I just want it to be nowhere near my spacer. See what I mean? Gets a little bit close. But yeah, the spacer is all against that piece of timber now. And you know, there's no gapping or there's no anything, so I just made sure there's a solid, it's not going under or anything like that, which is cool. It's what I want, and that's pressed up and up on that pretty well. This quality Rube sander I've actually had for close to 30 years, would you believe? Alright guys, we're almost there. Also, what I went out and did was I cut out a little piece of paper to mimic a gasket for that perimeter there around that rubber, because what I've noticed is that rubber is probably like 1/2 mil above that surface, and all I want to do is just mimic, like as if, you know, as if it was a gasket or even a bit of celastic in a silicone. So I went out and just cut myself some thin normal paper, and I'm going to place that there around the perimeter of the outside of that rubber. Just when I put my plate there, I don't want it, you know, warping over or anything like that. I want it just to clamp nice and even, and just see what this top dampening plate does to the fuel bowl. Let's go ahead and put all these collets on. So that'll be the top plate I'm going to use. So we'll go ahead and bolt that down. Almost there guys, so the top plate's on there, and you can see the bottom plate's held down by self-tappet wood screws. They need to be separate from that top plate. They can't be touching, and you can see the gap there that they're separate. And you know, that top plate will be suspended. Alright guys, so now I've gone ahead and set up the Edelbrock phenolic solid spacer, and that's just screwed down nice and tightly with some long all wooden self-tappets. You can see there, self-tappet screws. And yeah, it's dead flat on that surface, dead flat on that plate there. Fuel strapped down. Let's test it. Can't see no difference. Okay, so there you have it, guys. Vibration test all done and complete. So what do you think? You guys seen all that yourselves? What do you make of it? Now, to be honest, there was not much difference. And I was a little bit disappointed, actually. I would have thought this thing would have cushioned that glass fuel bowl that I had up there better than what it had cushioned with that piece. To be honest, I would have expected this thing, the dampener, to have worked better, like you know, with me being able to physically see it work and dampen better than what I seen compared to this piece, and that's solid. I would have thought, you know, there would have been a big difference, you know, in observing the fuel doing what it's you know doing under, you know, on top of that vibrating sander that I got. And I just had to hold the bottom timber with my left hand and record at the same time, just to keep it stable, because I was shuddering a bit. I just had to find that nice smooth sweet spot, so I just held that and kept it stable, and it worked out pretty well, actually. I'm real happy with the vibration test. But what do you make out of it? To be honest, when I put this solid bit on and clamped that down real well and strong, I would have expected the fuel to have jumped around way more, like to have sort of been spiky and splashy, but it actually wasn't. To be honest, to my surprise, when you physically look at it, it looked like the vibration with this piece was more shallower, if that makes sense. But what I noticed with the dampener, it just looked like the fuel bouncing around, even though it was bouncing around, it looked like it was more gentle, like gentler, as far as like shuddering and bouncing. It looked like there was a smoothness to it all while it was dancing and bouncing around. Where this thing, it looked like the fuel was shallower while it was doing it, but it looked a little bit more violently it was doing it, like real quick, if that makes sense. But you know, if you were to weigh them up, if you were to eye it out, and you guys can see there yourselves, you know, they pretty much look the same. I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you're real finical about things, and you know, you're some high-end race team that doesn't want to take shortcuts or risks, and you want to take, you know, their word for it, you know, for a gadget, something like this, to do its job, I guess you can go this path. But yeah, like I said, physically looking at them, they look like he was doing the same thing. The only difference I could tell with the solid piece was the ripples, as far as both of them. The ripple effect, if you're, you know, physically the size of them looked the same, where these ripples were in a lineal format, and they just look like more quicker, more violently, where this one was more bubbly, if you get me. So the ripples, the physical size of them, you can see there, they're pretty much the same, where that looked like more bubbly and just more gentler. That's all it was. It just looked like yours smooth and gentle compared to that. But yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you ask me, going back to what I mentioned before, with something like this, you can probably make up something like this under a solid spacer, and you know, you can possibly mimic what that's doing. But it'll definitely have better heat transfer, just separating the two alloy pieces, and that rubber, you know, taking up all that heat and dissipating that heat way better than what that phenolic, you know, plastic stuff will do. I mean, this soaks up heat, but it's still, you know what I mean, it still brings over heat towards your carb. So there you go, guys, a nice little test that, you know, it's probably a first actually on YouTube. I'll try to browse to see if anyone's done this thing, a dampener, compared to a normal one. I couldn't find one. I may be wrong, but there you go. Nice little test, and you guys can make up your own mind about it all. Anyway, thanks guys.